Es increíble tenerlos aquí. De verdad, muchas gracias por acompañarnos a recibir a George Martin en México. Recibirlo en México, en Guadalajara y en la FIL de Guadalajara, que es la feria en español más importante del mundo. Estamos felices de tener a George aquí. Yo soy Roberto Banchik, el director general de Penguin Random House. Orgullosos editores de George Martin en América Latina. Pero como no vienen aquí a oírme a mí, sino a ver y a escuchar a George Martin, los dejo con él y con Gwendolyn Perla. Gwendolyn es editora de George Martin en México y América Latina, y ella será la que organizará la dinámica de preguntas y respuestas que hemos preparado para George. Entonces, sin más, los dejo con nuestro invitado de honor y muchas gracias a ustedes por acompañarnos. Gracias.
Hola a todos, buenas tardes, qué emoción. Yo voy a ser muy breve, les voy a contar solamente lo que está pasando aquí gracias a ustedes. Después de 5 años logramos que el gran George R.R. Martin viniera a la FIL y lo que decidimos simplemente es que yo pudiera fungir como interlocutora suya, y lo que va a ocurrir aquí es que las preguntas que ustedes enviaron están aquí contenidas en esta tómbola verde. Aquellas preguntas que salgan sorteadas y que George quiera responder se harán acreedoras a un libro. Voy a leer el nombre de la persona que envió la pregunta y les pido que después se dirijan al stand de Penguin Random House a pedir su libro. Habiendo dicho esto, ladies and gentlemen, please raise your hands and welcome the great George R.R. Martin. You go there. Go over there. Come. Right here.
Thank you.
So, George, any welcome words for your Mexican audience?
There's quite a lot of them.
Yes.
Hello.
So, anything else before we start with the questions?
You have a whole bunch of questions
yes,
there,
I
right?
have a huge batch of questions here. So we're going to start by the first one. And let's hope you guys get your book. So the first one was sent by Miguel Alvarez. Many elements in a Game of Thrones are based on historic events. Which historic event would you like to use as an inspiration to create a new story?
Boy, you know, I'm not done with the old story yet, so I don't think it's time for me to quite be figuring out what I'm going to write after Game of Thrones. Actually, I have 2 books left: Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. But I also have to write like 8 or 9 more Dunk and Egg adventures. And I've got a contract to finish the history of the Targaryen dynasty. Some of you may have read my book of fake history, The World of Ice and Fire, which had various stories in it about the Targaryen kings who came before the time of Game of Thrones. And those stories were very heavily abridged. I have hundreds more pages of that material, and people seem interested in it. So I'm going to flesh that out and do it. And of course, I'm talking with HBO about more television series. So do you need to translate? Some of them.
No, they are actually having.
Oh, they have.
Yeah,
okay.
Simultaneous translation, all of them. So let's go for the second one.
Okay.
And this one was sent by Uriel Morales. What book or saga would you have liked to write?
What
What book or saga would you have liked to write?
Well, I'm pretty happy with the one I did write. I
Perfect.
mean, I love fantasy. I love fantasy, and there are many great fantasies out there. Of course, I was enormously influenced by J.R. Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. But I don't think I could have written it. I mean, that takes a whole different sensibility. Tolkien was a very different man. He lived in a different time. He had different influences, and he produced one of the enduring masterpieces of the 20th century, a book that I think will be read and reread for as long as people read fantasy. There are other great fantasists out there. Jack Vance, a writer who I admire enormously. His books are terrific, and he died a few years ago, sadly, so there won't be any more of them, but what a magnificent talent. And today is the golden age of fantasy because there's so many great new writers coming up. People like Daniel Abraham and Patrick Rothfuss, Scott Lynch, Robin Hobb. She's been around a while, but she's still doing magnificent work. So many new fantasists, diverse voices, people taking fantasy in new and unexpected directions. And I enjoy reading their work too. But I wouldn't aspire to write it. They have to write it.
Okay.
They have their stories. I have my stories.
Okay. So let's go for the next one. And this one goes. Oh, I love this one. This was sent by Eliel de Luna Elizondo. Congratulations for such a smart question. And he goes, what would Melisandre watch in the flames if she asked Roller for a vision of yourself?
Excuse me, there was a sound I didn't quite hear.
Oh yeah, again. So, what would Melisandre watch in the flames if she asked Roller for a vision of yourself?
Well, Melisandre's flames tell her many things, but the visions are not always clear. You know, you have to know how to interpret them. The first thing Melisandre looks for anytime she looks in the flames is a danger to herself. So that's why she's always aware when someone is planning to kill her or attack her, such as Davos was at a certain part. But other than that, she usually has specific questions in mind when she's looking into the flames. I have people out here who are eager for me to sign their books.
Yes.
I can't.
That'll happen.
I can't. We have. I'm doing a signing tomorrow. 500 books. That's about all I can do in 90 minutes. I'm fast, but I'm also human, so I can only do that. I know that not everybody here has been able to get tickets for that signing for the 500 books. And I'm sorry about that. I wish I could sign books for all of you, but it would kill me. And I think you'd rather I write the books. Some of you, if you want to go up online, I have a little movie theater and bookstore in Santa Fe, the Jean Cocteau Cinema, and we sell signed books there. So you could purchase a copy of my book that's already signed, and we will mail it to you. Just buy it from the Jean Cocteau. And we also have books there signed by many other authors. We have, in terms of my books, we have the English editions, we have the Spanish editions, we have many other languages and editions if you want French or German or whatever. And we have books by Pat Conroy and by Connie Willis and by Daniel Abraham and by numerous other people. So that's a good source for signed books. But I'm sorry, I can't sign all your books.
Okay, so I got the next question here. And this one is good. It was sent by Nidia Dolores Uribe. And if you were judged in a trial by combat, who would be your champion?
Well, does it have to be someone from Game of Thrones? Because, you know, if it doesn't have to be someone from Game of Thrones, I might pick one of my wildcard characters, like Lohengrin, my wildcard German knight who can conjure up a suit of absolutely invincible ghost steel armor and a ghost steel sword that can cut through anything by an act of will. That's his superpower. So he would make mincemeat of any one of the seven kingdoms. Even Valerian steel can't stand up to Lohengrin's ghost steel.
Okay.
But if it had to be someone from the seven kingdoms, boy, that's a tough one. And also the question, are they alive or dead? I mean, can I pick? If I could pick Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, he's a pretty formidable warrior, but he's dead before the books begin. Jaime would be a good choice, but only if he has both hands. Two hands. Brienne.
Yeah.
Brienne of Tarth.
There you go. Love that one. So we'll go to the following question. Oh, so Alejandro Barragan wants to know, how would you describe Littlefinger and Varys' relationship?
My what?
How would you describe Littlefinger and Varys' relationship?
Adversarial. Both of them know a lot about the other one, including some very damaging things. So they're in essentially a stalemate. Because each one knows that if he revealed what he knew about the other one, then the other one would reciprocate and they could both be destroyed. So they're kind of locked in a certain stalemate. I think Littlefinger has a better idea of what Varys wants than Varys has an idea of what Littlefinger wants. Littlefinger is an agent of chaos who likes to be unpredictable and succeeds in that.
Okay, thank you. So we're going here. This was sent by Luis Eduardo Becerra Ontiveros. And the question is, you have been writing A Song of Ice and Fire for over 20 years and it's still on the run. Has it been difficult to keep up with the original idea?
Well, the original idea has grown. I'm not the first author to experience this. I mean, J.R. Tolkien, when he started Lord of the Rings, was basically intending to write a sequel to The Hobbit. And like The Hobbit, it was supposed to be one book. But he said famously, the tale grew in the telling. And so did mine. I mean, initially, back in 1994, when I first sent in the first 100 pages and a 2-page letter about where I was going, I was selling a trilogy, 3 books. And at that time, if you look at my earlier books, I was generally writing 1 novel a year. So in my innocence, sweet summer child, I thought I'd finish the whole thing in 3 years. So in that case, my trilogy would have been out by 1997 or 1998. It's taken a little longer than that, as you may have noticed. And here I am still writing it. I had no idea how big it was going to be or how long it was going to take. But you have to follow the story wherever it leads. And it's led to some pretty interesting places, including Guadalajara.
Okay. This question was sent by Rubén Padilla Cortés. And the question is, in such a violent and devastated world, does George R.R. Martin think humanity will have a happy ending?
Well, it might be happy for some people. For others, it might not be so happy. You know, I don't know if that as a writer, that I really believe in the conventional, cliched happy ending, where everything is resolved and a good guy wins and a bad guy loses. We very seldom see that in real life or in history, and I don't find it as emotionally satisfying myself as what I like to call the bittersweet ending. I think Tolkien, you know, I keep coming back to Tolkien because he was a huge influence on me. If you look at Lord of the Rings, its ending is at best bittersweet. Yes, the One Ring is destroyed, Sauron is cast down and defeated, and Aragorn becomes king, but at great cost. At great cost. The Shire is destroyed in the scouring of the Shire. Frodo is never the same. His wound that he received on Weathertop never heals, and he can never really enjoy the world that he's won for others. To me, that ending had great poignance and great power, especially as I got older and I understood it. You know, when I first read those books, I was like 13 years old. And, you know, you reach the end where the ring goes into the fire, and then you say, what are all these other pages? That was the end, wasn't it? That was the end. The good guys win. And I didn't quite know what to make of the scouring of the Shire. But as I reread those books, as I do every few years, the brilliance and the necessity of the scouring of the Shire becomes clearer and clearer to me. And it's a brilliant piece. And Tolkien, of course, was really writing in a metaphorical sense about England after World War II and some of the things that were experienced there. But you know, that's the perfect ending. The way he ended that book was just right. And I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to end my book, but I suspect the overall flavor is going to be as much bittersweet as it is happy.
Okay, right. So the next one was sent by Lalo Reyes. Did Robert ever suspect Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not his?
No, Robert was not a real intellectual giant. He had many grievances against Cersei, but that never would have dawned on him. I think partly because if he ever had known, he would have killed everybody, and he never would have dreamed that anyone would be so stupid enough to risk his wrath, and his wrath could be considerable.
Okay. Then we go, Elvia Vasquez Reyes. She wants to know, what was your inspiration to create the Dothraki?
Well, the Dothraki, I take many things from history. So the Dothraki were a combination of a number of influences from the horse tribes of the Eurasian steppes. Certainly there's a lot of the Mongols in them, but they're not purely the Mongols. I added, there's also material about the Huns. There's some material there that I took from Amerindian tribes, such as the Sioux and the Cheyenne, the horse tribes of the Great American Prairies. And there's a certain amount that's pure fantasy, you know, where you have a little fun. You mix all this stuff together, you come up with your thing, and then you add a few fantasy twists on it, because this is, after all, a fantasy series. So.
Okay. This one was sent by Alex Ojeda. How would you describe the relationship between Brienne and Jaime?
I don't know. How would you describe it? I mean, that's an interesting question. It's evolving. I mean, it began as very antagonistic, but they're getting to know each other. My microphone is falling apart here. Can I still be heard? I hope so. Yes, there it is.
Can you still hear us?
I'll put the little rubbery thing back here.
So I guess you can keep talking.
So you'll have to continue to read the books to see where that ends up.
Okay. Okay, so we have another question. This was sent by Oscar Adrián Moriel Tena. Congratulations. So, if you had the chance to create a story situated on another writer's universe, which one would that be? What story would you write, and what would you explore?
In another writer's universe?
Yeah.
You know, I don't tend to do that very often. I like to create my own universes. The one exception I have made for that was Jack Vance, who I mentioned earlier. You know, I edited a book a few years ago called Songs of the Dying Earth, in which myself and 20 other writers who are all huge fans of Jack Vance, wrote stories set in Jack Vance's Dying Earth universe. Jack was around and he was writing brilliant science fiction and fantasy from the late 1940s, from World War II, up until his death just a few years ago. He was well into his 90s when he died. And his work was enormously influential. I mean, if any of you have ever played Dungeons and Dragons, the entire magic system of Dungeons and Dragons was created by Jack Vance. They just kind of lifted it from the Dying Earth books, the whole sequence where you have spells and you memorize the spells, but you can only use them once and then they're gone. That was Jack Vance. And the Dying Earth was a wonderful world. So I did write a story for that book, and a number of other people also contributed stories to Songs of the Dying Earth. And I'm very proud of that. It was a tribute anthology to Jack, and he gave us permission to do it. There's a lot of tribute anthologies that you see out there, which are normally done after the writer dies. So the writer doesn't get to really know that all these people are paying tribute to him because he's dead. We did this while Jack was still alive. And in addition to writing these stories, everybody wrote an afterword about how they had encountered the work of Jack Vance and the effect that it had on them, the influence it had on them, and some very, very moving and eloquent essays by all sorts of really major fantasy and science fiction writers. And Jack got to read all of those while he was still alive. I hope it gave him a certain amount of satisfaction. But I'm very proud of having edited that book.
Okay, thank you. So, moving on to the next question, Dexter Cortez wants to know, I am not asking you to reveal who will get the Iron Throne, but who do you think deserves it?
I don't know. That deserve is really an operative word. The Iron Throne doesn't necessarily go to who deserves it, but to who has the power to take it and to hold it. But there are things in the books where I indicate, what a king should be, what separates a good king from a bad king. And a king is, at least through most of history, not really so much these days, but through most of history, a king is a very powerful person and a very wealthy person and enjoys a lot of perks. And some kings get seduced by this, by the power, by the wealth, by the glory. But really, it should be a public service position. The king's job is the land, the people of the land, to make them prosperous, to protect them, to defend them, to provide them with justice. And that's what the ideal king should be. There have been precious few of them in human history, sad to say.
Okay. The next one was sent by Adelaida Jaramillo, and she wants to know, is any of your characters going to die of old age?
I believe she has not been paying enough attention because I believe that Maester Aemon has already died of old age.
Oh, you're right. We missed that. You're right. So, the next one. This was sent by Denise Ayala. This is a complex question.
Oh boy.
Well, so I think. How do you control so many simultaneous plot lines inhabited by so many characters? What is your method to maintain all those stories coherent and avoid loose ends?
Well, how do I do it? I do it with increasing difficulty. It's not easy. Sometimes I look back and say, did it really have to be 7 kingdoms? 5 kingdoms, the 5 kingdoms of Westeros. That would have been good, right? 5 kingdoms? But, you know, once you start down the road, you have to continue down the road. And I feel like I'm juggling sometimes. And I've thrown all these balls in the air, and I'm madly juggling to try to keep them going. And every once in a while, one falls down and hits me in the head. And hopefully I catch that on the reread. And we'll see by the end of the book if I've left any loose ends. I hope not. That's not to say that everything is going to be tied up completely neatly in a bow. I mean, I think there's a difference between a loose end and something that's deliberately left by the author ambiguous, or something for the readers to think about and worry about and debate about. For me, that's part of the fun of reading and writing, is having stories that maybe have a little ambiguity to them, a little subtlety to them, and everything is not crystal clear and laid out. You have to think about some things and put clues together and see what it all adds up to. So some of that is going to be left there deliberately. But first I have to finish the damn thing.
Okay, thank you, George. So, Fanny Cano wants to know, why are there no children in a shy?
Why, what?
Why are there no children?
In a shy?
Yes.
Well, because, you know, a shy is a dark and dangerous and mysterious place. And of course, that's, where does she get that information? She got that information from one of my fake history books, right?
Apparently?
Yes, and who wrote the fake history book? A maester at the Citadel. Where is the Citadel? On the westernmost edge of the world. Where is the Shy? On the easternmost edge of the world. It's a little bit like a medieval monk writing about what was happening in Vietnam. They're not necessarily the greatest experts, but you know, you may find out. I don't plan to set any scenes in a Shy, at least not in the present book, but you may find out a little more about it in future books. We do have one character who's been there, of course, and that's Melisandre. So in the chapters from her thought, you may occasionally have her think back on some of her time in a Shy.
Okay. Oh, I love this one as well. This was sent by Yvonne Medina Zaragoza, and she sends, what was the epiphany that dragged you to devoting your life to writing?
Excuse me?
What was the epiphany that dragged you to devoting your life to writing?
It was my inability to do anything else. When I was quite young, of course, I was a big comic book fan. And you know, my goal in life at that time was to be, you know, Batman. First, I had to become a billionaire so I could be a billionaire playboy. And then I had to exercise a lot to get in really good shape so I could swing on bat ropes and punch people out while dressed as a bat. That didn't seem really feasible. And then I thought maybe I would be Green Lantern instead. So, because all I had to do was find a ring for that. It took a lot less exercise. And I looked around for a ring, but there was no rings to be found, and no radioactive spiders bit me. So I was just stuck with making up stories, which is something I've done since I was a little kid. And I was pretty good at making up stories, so I've continued to make up stories until this very day.
Okay. This question was sent by Maria Salazar Montoya. If you could ask any question to Tolkien, what would that be?
Why did you bring Gandalf back from the dead? He should have stayed dead. That was one of the great moments when I mean, people talk about my character is dying, but I remember when I was 12, 13 years old and reading Fellowship of the Ring, and Gandalf goes down into that pit with the Balrog, and fly, you fools, and God, the power of that scene. And Gandalf was dead. He was like the daddy. He was the one who knew everything. He was the smart guy. Now the kids were on their own, and how were they going to fare? I mean, it was such a tremendous, gutsy, powerful thing to do. But then he brought him back.
Okay.
Had a different cloak on, white instead of gray. Okay, but I would have left him dead.
Good.
I almost wrote Tolkien when I was a kid. I really wish I had, because I learned, many years later, reading biographies of Tolkien, I learned that Tolkien responded to many of the fans who wrote him. And if as a 13-year-old kid I had written Tolkien a letter, there was probably a pretty good chance I would have gotten a letter back, and boy, that would have been an amazing thing. It doesn't apply to me, however, so don't send me letters. Tolkien lived before the internet. He didn't get that many letters. I get like hundreds of emails every day, and I can't reply to them all. I'm sorry. Also, he was much nicer than I was.
Edgar Alejandro Gallegos Alvarado asks, which of your characters would you say is the most suitable to be a leader nowadays, and why?
Which of my characters would be a leader in this day and age?
Yes.
Well, probably Tyrion. Tyrion is very smart. He's also very ruthless, sadly, which you meet. I didn't necessarily who would be a beloved leader, but he has the intellectual ability to do it. He has a certain understanding of politics, and he has a lot of experience in the dark side of humanity. So he wouldn't be too naive for the job. He might be a good choice.
I agree. Very good.
Now, Danny would also be an interesting choice if we could bring her dragons along. The recent American election might have turned out very different if Hillary Clinton had dragons.
Arturo Calvario wants to know, what was the original idea, the seed that triggered the universe of Game of Thrones?
I never know where ideas come from. I've told this story many times, but it all goes back to 1991. I was working a lot in Hollywood in those days, developing TV shows and movies. But in the summer of 91, I had no Hollywood contracts going at that particular moment. So I decided to write a novel. I hadn't written one in a few years. And I actually began a novel called Avalon, which was a science fiction novel set in my 1,000 Worlds universe that many of my short stories in the 70s and 80s had been set in. And I'd been thinking about Avalon for like a decade, and I started writing it. And I was about 30 pages into it, and suddenly the idea came to me for this scene where a man takes his young son out to watch him chop the head off a man, and they find some direwolf pups in the summer snow. I always knew that it was the summer snow, so that the thing about the seasons was there right from the beginning. I didn't know quite who the characters were or what world this was. I know it wasn't part of Avalon. It was a whole new thing. It felt like a fantasy. Maybe it was just a short story, but it came to me so vividly that I put Avalon aside. I've never returned to it. And I started writing this, and I wrote that chapter, the first Brienne chapter in the books, in probably no more than like 3 days. It just kind of poured out of me. And by the time I finished, I knew what the second chapter had to be. So I went right on to the Catalan chapter that follows. and wrote a number of those in a row. And then Hollywood reared its head again, so I wasn't able to complete it. And that book went in the drawer while I went out and did several more Hollywood pilots and movies, wrote screenplays for movies that never got filmed. But I never stopped thinking about it. Those characters, Bran and Jon Snow and Ned and Daenerys, were always in the back of my mind, kind of whispering to me, you got to come back and write more about us. You got to come back and write more about us. And I finally listened to them, and I did, and here we are today.
Oh, this one is lots of fun. This was sent by Benigna Angelica Cárdenas Hernández. And the question is, what did Patrick Payne do so the prostitutes didn't charge him?
All right, give me that one again.
Yeah, so what did Patrick Payne do so the prostitutes did not charge him?
Guys, I write these books, and there's this TV show that's done by David Benioff and Dan Weiss, and some of you may have seen it. Sometimes they put things in the TV show that are not in the books. So you're going to have to ask them what Patrick Payne did, because that scene is not in the books. And I know nothing.
Okay. Okay, Jose Ascensión Acevedo Fletes. I have no royal lineage. Having cleared that up, what advice would you give me to ask Sansa out on a date?
Well, if you have no nobility, I don't think the Stark family would be too interested in you dating Sansa. All the marriages were kind of arranged back then. They were political alliances between great houses, and they had to bring some advantage. And Sansa didn't fool around with peasant boys, so that wasn't going to happen. Now, if you're talking about asking Sophie Turner out on a date, that's a whole nother issue. She's a modern 21st century woman from Great Britain, and a beautiful one, but she's in charge of her own social calendar, so I can't help you there, Guy.
Okay. Well, this was sent by Jorge Eduardo Lemos. If you could change anything in a Game of Thrones, what would that be?
If I could change anything?
Yes.
I would have all the books done by now. That would be good. I would like to change that. I don't know quite how I'd do that though, because I'm a slow writer, and as I get older, I seem to be getting slower, not faster. I am hoping, some of you who are familiar with my working career know that I did do a number of novels before Game of Thrones. Dying in the Light, Fever Dream, The Armageddon Rag. With each of those novels, there was a point where I could see the end in sight. It was like I had crested the top of the hill, and now I was rushing toward the finish line. And whenever that happened, I sped up considerably. I'm hoping at some point that happens on A Song of Ice and Fire, that at some point, with Winds of Winter and then Dream of Spring, that I will see the finish line, and suddenly the work will start going much faster, just as it did on those earlier books. But so far, it hasn't done it.
Yes.
Is there anything I would actually change about what is in the books themselves? I don't know. I think In retrospect, maybe I should have made Rob a viewpoint character in the early books. A lot of people kind of figured out that poor Rob was going to die just because he didn't have any chapters. And I don't like to be predictable. And that would have allowed me to do it. On the other hand, it would have made the books longer too. So I don't know. That's one that I played with from time to time. What in the world is going on out there?
The traffic, Mexican traffic.
That's just traffic. Okay. Someone has a
That's
hurry to
just
get
traffic.
somewhere. So if you had a dragon, you could clear that right up.
Yes. So, Monica Bernal Cadena asks, did you ever imagine your story would have such an impact on society, practically becoming a cult reading?
Becoming a what?
Becoming a cult reading. Cult reading. Again?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
Okay, so did you ever imagine your story would have such an impact on society, practically becoming a cult reading?
No, a cult. Okay, yeah. No, you know, whenever you write a book, you hope it's successful. And I've had books before that have been successful. I've had books that have been failures. I've had books that have been critically acclaimed, but commercial failures. But no one could have anticipated the scale to which Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones has filled the world. I told a story the other day at dinner. I took a cruise a few months ago, and we visited a number of cities in Asia. And we stopped on the Isle of Borneo, and we visited this tourist attraction in Borneo where there are 5 tribes that have gotten together, and they've all built replica villages of their ancient tribe, you know, the longhouses, and you walk through the jungle and the hills with your group from the bus tour. And as you visit each village, they demonstrate the way they cook, and they have, you know, local people there who are dressed in period costume, and each of the tribes had their own distinctive costume. And 2 of the tribes were headhunters and cannibals, and 3 were not. And they had people walking us around. You know, it's a tour. A lot of tourists come there who stop in Borneo, and you have to keep the groups moving because there are new buses coming all the time. So we always had a couple of the people, the actors, I guess you'd call them, who were in costume, were guiding the group around and with walkie-talkies. And hey, yes, they're at Village 3 now. We're moving them along to Village 4. Yes, we're just starting the archery exhibition, and they were keeping track. And we had one of the cannibal headhunter guys who was walking with us for all 4 hours, wearing basically nothing but a breechcloth around his waist, and carrying a walkie-talkie. And formidable looking guy. You wouldn't want to meet him in the jungle. He was from one of the headhunter tribes he was representing. And he was with us all afternoon, keeping us going. And then when we reached the end of the tour, and we were about to get on the buses to go, he came up to me and said, "Mr. Martin, I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones." So that was when it really drew home to me that even the cannibal headhunters of Borneo are aware of this show and these books. And if I'd been any doubt about the global reach of these things, no, it's exceeded anything that I could have expected, anything that HBO ever expected, anything that my publishers ever expected. And it's been a thrilling. It's great. I've enjoyed it. I'd enjoyed it more if I was finished these last 2 books. So I need to work on that.
Thank you. Raúl Fuentes. George, please, could you tell us about your favorite book? What's the dearest memory you have of it?
I don't know that I have a favorite book. I have, maybe 20 favorite books. And I've read, of course, thousands of books. Since I've been a kid, I've been a guy who's had his nose in a book. There's a line that I used in Game of Thrones, that a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies, and the person who does not read lives only one. And I have lived 1,000 lives. I mean, I've gone to other planets. I've walked in Middle Earth. I've ridden with Ivanhoe in the Crusades and in the tourneys in front of King John. I've adventured with Robin Hood in the forest. I've climbed Mount Everest. I've done all of these things in the pages of the books, and I've gone to distant stars too, because I am a science fiction reader and writer. There are books that I return to regularly. They're not all science fiction or fantasy. I do reread some of my favorite Jack Vance books every few years. I do love Tolkien, of course. Lord of the Rings is another book I return to. There are certain other books that are not SF. I'm a huge fan of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. That's one book that I return to repeatedly. Some of the best book by Dickens, I think my favorite is A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. What a great beginning, and then what a great end. Is a far, far better thing I do than I've ever done. Great bittersweet ending there. So, yeah, I have a lot of books that I like. And the best books, to my mind, the very best books are the ones that you can reread over and over again. And every time you return to them, you find new things in them and you enjoy them just as much. And that's only true for a small number of books. I mean, a lot of books are very enjoyable the first time you read them, but they don't repay repeated rereadings.
Yes. So Sabrina Torres would like to know, when did you first write your first book?
When did I first write my first book?
Yes.
Oh God, I was probably about 9 years old.
Yes, tell us that
I wouldn't
story.
call it a book. It was like a werewolf story that I wrote out longhand, and I sold it to other kids in the project for a nickel. And I had to read it to them too, but it was a good way to make a nickel.
Until one of your little friend's mother came to your mother, right?
Yes, that Korea was. It was, my stories were giving the kid nightmares, so his mother complained to my mother, and she stopped me writing those monster stories.
Okay. So Ignacio Adan Vera Rodriguez, if you lived in the universe of A Song of Ice and Fire, what religion would you follow and why? Wow.
What religion would I follow and why? Well, that's an interesting question. The predominant religion, of course, is the faith of the seven in the world of Westeros. So there's a certain advantage to following that, because in any society, if you're part of the predominant religion, it has social advantages. You're accepted, you're part of the major group, you're respectable. If you follow a different religion, you're not so respectable. On the other hand, Melisandre's religion, they actually seem to have magical powers, bringing people back from the dead and things like that. That's a powerful selling point. I've often thought in the real world, if there was one religion where, they had actual magical powers and could do miracles on command, and all of the religions have miracles, 2,000 years ago or 500 years ago, or they're all in their holy books, but none of the people around currently can do those things. So, and they all promise eternal life, but everybody in them always dies. So I think a religion where they had actual magic that worked would become a very popular religion, whether it's in the real world or in Westeros. Of course, there is a certain grim intellectual power behind the faith of the faceless men. Valar Morghulis, all men must die, and all men do die, so it doesn't seem to matter what god they pray to. In the end, they're dead, which would seem to indicate that the god of death is a really, really powerful god, and maybe one that we should pay attention to.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Fernando Rocha. If your wife asked you to bring back to life one of your characters, your wife, would you do it? Any clues of who may that be?
Well, I don't know if I'd bring anyone back. I know she does have a favorite character, and she has threatened to leave me if I kill that character. So I do have to be very careful about that. But I'm not going to tell you what character that is. You have to find out from Carol.
Okay, so Belén Velázquez, I'm sorry. When you first started writing A Song of Ice and Fire 20 years ago, what kind of audience were you addressing? Today, who are you writing for?
I'm writing for me. The fact that you guys like the story is great, and I'm very, very pleased by that. But I think ultimately you have to write for yourself. You can't try to please other people. You write the truth as you do it. You write the kind of stories that you want to read. Books like A Song of Ice and Fire were the kind of books I craved when I opened a fantasy book. So you write to please yourself. You follow your own muse, your own vision of what truth is and what literature is and what a good story is. And then you hope that when you send it out into the world that there are some other people who will like it too. Unfortunately, in my case, there seem to be.
Great. Oh, he's a very, very, very big fan of your books. Jorge Ochoa Guajardo writes, the chapter The Forsaken is clearly the darkest narrative in all the series. How long did you wait to reveal all this mystic horror Lovecraftian part of the story? In consequence, we are all raising the Greyjoy banners.
Yeah, that is a dark chapter. But there are a lot of dark chapters right now in the book that I'm writing. It is called The Winds of Winter. And I've been telling you for 20 years that winter was coming. And winter is the time when things die and, cold and ice and darkness fills the world. So this is not going to be the happy feel-good book that people may be hoping for. And some of the characters are in very dark places. Of course, that's what you want to do. I mean, I'm not writing a series in the traditional sense. I'm writing one really long novel with multiple points of view. And in any story, the classic structure is things get worse before they get better. So things are getting worse for a lot of people.
Okay. So I'm being told we have 7 minutes left.
Okay.
You can choose between responding to 3 more questions or 2 more questions and a peculiar farewell speech, or we can keep going with the questions.
I'll do the questions. I don't have a farewell speech.
Okay. So let's go. Okay. So this was sent by Eduardo Reyes, and the question is, any hints into what Lyanna Stark told Ned at the Tower of Joy?
I have to keep reading the books. I'm not going to give that away on a stage in Guadalajara.
Okay. And Salvador Romero, as a reader, what characters have captivated you the most?
You know, I like all my characters. You know, it's like asking a mother, who's your favorite child? You have to love them all. I even love the bad guys. I mean, people like Theon, who is, you know, the Hound, even that little shit Joffrey. You know, you write about them long enough, and you try to understand them and what motivates them, and put them through their things, and you can't help develop a certain affection for them.
Okay, I would like to ask a question of myself.
Uh-oh.
Yes, because I already know the answer, and I think it's a wonderful and amazing response. How do you create these amazing, powerful, independent female characters?
To my mind, it's not any different than creating male characters. I mean, I start from the basic presumption that women are people, and that they have the same basic humanity as men. We want the same things. We want love. We want respect. We want to succeed in the world. We want to protect the people we love, our children, our spouses, our brothers and sisters. You know, the human motivations are basically the same. And yes, there are some differences between the sexes, but compared to the things that are not different, that are the same, we're all human beings. Am I fading out? Okay. The key to creating any character, I think, is empathy. You know, when I was first an aspiring writer, I would read all these books about how to write. And one thing that was in a lot of them was write what you know, write what you know. And I hated that because I didn't know much of anything. I was this kid from Bayonne, New Jersey. I'd never gone anywhere. I'd never done anything. I was just in school. I didn't want to write about school. I'd never had any adventures. I wanted to write about dragons and knights and cowboys. I wanted to write about spacemen and monsters and all of these things that, of course, I didn't know. Ultimately, what I came to realize is that that's just the furniture. That's not important. What's important is the humanity of the characters. What's important about it, empathy. So I don't know what it is actually like to be a dwarf, but I can imagine what it would be like. I can try to think about it and say, all right, if I was a dwarf, what challenges would I face? What sort of things would I encounter? How would I deal with it? Or I could deal with it this way, I could deal with it the other way. What would it do? How would it shape me? And if I was an exiled princess, I'm not royalty of any kind. I'm a longshoreman's kid from New Jersey. I don't know what it's like to be a princess, let alone one that has your kingdom down. But I can think about it. I can empathize. The gift of empathy is one of the greatest gifts a writer can have. And that's certainly true for a man writing about women or a woman writing about men. You know, you can't think about them as an alien species. They're just people, and you try to empathize. And fortunately, I have a large cast of female characters, which allows me to reflect in my books the same variety I see in real life. All of us have good and evil in us, men or women. There are good ones, there are bad ones, there are selfish ones, there are noble ones, there are people who are selfish on Tuesday and noble on Wednesday. we're all like that. And that's what I try to do. I love gray characters. I love the complexity of the human race and the fact that we're all such puzzles, and that's the great thing to write about. I'm not interested in cardboard heroes or cardboard villains. Give me real human beings, regardless of whether how tall they are, or what their genitalia is like, or what class they are born into. The basic humanity unites us all, and it's the basic humanity I try to create in my stories.
Thank you, George.
Welcome.
So we're going now for the last question, okay? Let's hope it's a good one. The last question, guys. Lorena Aguilar, which are the biggest challenges you have faced throughout your writing career?
You know, the biggest challenges I have faced in my career, well, there's really two challenges. One is the endless challenge of trying to do the work as well as you can. You know, you write and you look at the work the next day, and it's so brilliant in your head, and then you look at what's on the paper and it's not brilliant enough, and you know, you're disappointed, you struggle with it more. It's always, how do you find the right words? How do you get the scenes and the characters and the things in your head down on paper? And that's the writer's endless task, and I don't think it can ever be accomplished. I mean, when I reread my old work, sometimes I'm pleased with it, but a lot of times I kind of wince. Oh, I could have done that better. And my old work, yes, the things I wrote 30 years ago, but also sometimes the thing I wrote last Tuesday. That's one challenge. It's the challenge of doing your art as well as you can do it. The other challenge is a much more practical one that also a lot of writers face, and it's the endless struggle between art and commerce. I mean, like everybody else, I've got bills to pay. You know, I'm obviously doing very well now. That hasn't always been true in my life. My career has crashed and burned at least twice, where I thought I was done as a writer, that I couldn't sell anymore. I was looking at other careers. How do I pay my mortgage? At one point, I almost lost my house because there was no money coming in. You know, I teach writing sometimes at things, and people approach me at events like this and say that they want to be writers. And what I always tell them is, you know, if you have to write. If the stories are in you, get it down. But you have to realize that you're entering a profession where there is no security. You have to be a bit of a gambler if you want to be a writer. You can roll the dice and you can, you know, win the lottery like I have, or a few other people have. Most people don't. Most people crap out, or they win for a while and then they lose. It's a profession. It's a career. It's a life that has highs and also has lows. Also has, you know, moments where you wonder whether anyone will ever appreciate the things you're doing. And you know, that can be difficult, and it's not for everybody. You really do have to be a bit of a gambler to embark on a writer, and I've dealt with that for, you know, certain parts of my life, definitely, and it shaped me.
So I'm gonna stand up. We would like to thank you all for coming. But I want you to show this man how thankful we are for having him in Mexico. So I beg you to thank George R. Martin for coming. Yes, I will. Yes. Thank you, George. Thank you for coming. He's gonna sign.